Welcome to our program, author Romina Garber on Mothering a Movement. I'm Becky. I'm a public librarian with Hillsborough County, and I'm here with our guest today, young adult author Romina Garber. She is here to talk about her Wolves of No World duology, which includes 𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓 and 𝘓𝘓𝘓. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to Romina and let her get started.
Thank you, Becky. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here with you again. I'm Romina Garber, the author of 𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓 and 𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓, and as well as the Zodiac Quartet, which I do not have behind me. So I was thinking I could begin by telling you a little bit about me and then going a little bit into the theme of this, which is mothering a movement, and particularly looking at the character of Manu in 𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓 and kind of how she exemplifies that. And after that, I'm going to keep it pretty brief to keep it open for your questions and to see what you would like to get out of the session. But if we have a lot of shy attendees, then I will probably jump straight into my craft spiel, mostly on world building, and you will get a look into my very Virgo brain for creating. So, if you want to avoid that and spare yourself, please think of questions and be dropping them in. And you can also be commenting in the chat, and we can keep this interactive and fun and intimate. So to start, I was born in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. I immigrated to the States when I was 5 with my family. I grew up in Miami. My first day of school was Valentine's Day, 1990. And obviously that led to a complete misreading of American culture and chocolate and cards, and awoke a romance in me, a very voracious romantic reader in me. So I was put in ESOL after that to learn English, and I felt like I didn't really hear the language until 4th grade when my teacher read to us from Shel Silverstein's Where the Sidewalk Ends. Blew me away. I probably didn't understand a lot of it, but there was the musicality of the words, creating melodies without instruments. There was something just about it that captivated me. So I started writing right away in Spanish, then Spanglish. But I wrote this poem called Si yo fuera la luz, iluminaría la avestruz. It like rhymed in this way the whole way through in Spanish. And my Spanish teacher liked it so much that she submitted it to the Miami County Fair, and I won 1st place. And I was such a shy, anxiety-prone kid that, it was the first time that I kind of realized, oh, I have a talent. This is my outlet. This is something I can do. I do have things to say. I just was lacking the medium. So after that, I was always writing. I got involved in the school paper in high school, as most of us do. And I got into journalism, and I interned at the Miami Herald the summer after graduating and before starting college. And this was at a time when newspapers were going digital, and a lot of newspapers just didn't have the same readership and subscriptions that older generations had, and they were worried about our younger generations not reading the news. And so I pitched this idea of writing a column from college, and it would be like stories from to kind of, so that basically, like, why would a teen read the paper if nobody's writing for them, right? So that was my argument. Like, you had to write for that audience to reel them in, and so I could do that. And so I ended up writing, they called it College She Wrote, which of course is a reference that went over most teens' heads. And it came out weekly, Sundays, across from Dave Barry, who was like my god at the time, so it was like the coolest experience. And I'm pretty sure I credit that column with figuring out who I wanted to write for, teens, essentially. I think I really found my voice and my audience at that point. But it wasn't until later in college that I started reading actual YA fantasy books that I realized exactly how I wanted to communicate. And it was through that, particularly YA fantasy. I've always been obsessed with world building. And that's why we'll probably finish this whole session together with a lot of world building. You know, I'm not sure why. It could be because I'm an immigrant. It could be that idea of the loss of the sense of home and the kind of recreating it and whatnot, and kind of never quite finding my place in this world. And for that reason, I've always loved exploring other worlds and creating worlds and kind of existing there for most of the time. And I mean, you know, that's the cool thing about writing a book. You have to exist in that world for years often. So it wasn't until this moment of discovery of what I wanted to do that I hit my first real period of rejection. You know, I had been like one of those ambitious kids that was constantly trying to prove I belonged here, that I wasn't, you know, just an affirmative action, you know, acceptance into college, you know, but rather that like I wanted to learn, I wanted to do stuff. And so I worked really hard for everything, and you know, and as a teen, you know, hopefully you see things pay off. Well, not so easy when it comes to getting published. I found I spent my entire 20s pretty much writing and getting rejected. I wrote 5 complete and independent novels. I'm talking like 400 pages ish each, completely unique things, everything. And every single one of them was rejected. And it was over a span of like 8 something year, probably about a decade. And I fell obviously into a depression about it. Of course, you know, who wouldn't? You know, you fall and you get up and you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to dust myself off and try again. And then again, and it's like, no, no, but I'm going to try again. And then you keep hearing no, no, no. And you start to wonder, well, can I do this? And so a quick just note on that, like, if we think about it, if I had stopped after that 5th rejection, I would not be talking to you right now. And so I would say to any of you, whether it's writing or anything else, if you are going through what I went through, my decade of rejection, and you're feeling discouraged, I beg of you, don't give up. You know, the only person that can say no is you. That's it. As long as you get up and do the next one and the next one, you're not stopping, and no one is stopping you. And I firmly believe that. So don't give up and hold on for your yes, because literally it just takes one. So rah rah. Going on. So let's talk a little bit about books. That's why you're here. My books, my first series is Zodiac. It's a quartet. It's set in a galaxy, as the name implies, where every planetary system or house is inspired by a different zodiac sign. So I kind of use the traits of each sign as my cheat sheet to kind of figure out, well, you know, what kind of personality, what kind of values they have, and based on that, you know, those traits, I would say, okay, if I had a population of people with these values and these traits and whatever else, what, you know, what kind of world would they build for themselves? What kind of government? What kind of spiritual beliefs? What kind of fashion, technology, transportation, you know, everything for all of these. And I geeked out on it. I'm Virgo myself, so you know, I love stuff like this. So in this particular series follows Ro, the teen guardian of House Cancer, whose home planet has just been decimated. And so by the mythical 13th guardian, Ophiuchus. And the problem is, as she tries to warn the other houses, the other signs of the impending doom, nobody believes her, because this is like saying Voldemort. You know, this is like saying something that's not real. So I think in some ways the series was an allegory for my publishing journey, in the sense of like working so hard on all these books and then sending them off to submission land and then watching one by one get destroyed. The protagonist of Zodiac, Ro, is actually, though, a young woman in politics, which is an area where I think, you know, it would be nice to see more women. And so she faces rejection through her journey across all of the planets. She's ignored, she's ridiculed, she's despised, blamed, she's nearly assassinated numerous times, but she keeps getting back up. And that's how she learns to trust herself and to wield her voice effectively. And it was really cool to write that, especially when I kept hearing from a lot of girls who read it and decided to get into politics inspired by Roe. And I mean, there is no higher compliment, of course. So, talk about mothering a movement. That's the subject of today. And it's a line that comes from 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘪. So, in particular, I guess I should first establish 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘪 for anyone who's not familiar. So, 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘪 and cazadora is a duology that follows Manu, an Argentine teen girl who grows up in hiding in Miami with her mom, not just because they're undocumented, but because Manu has otherworldly eyes. And these eyes would draw too much attention. And obviously, in their situation, attention brings danger. So when her mom is arrested by ICE, Manu is left on her own in the world. And so she decides to follow these clues to find out who her father's family was and why they're still on the run for them. And that leads her to discover a magical school in the Everglades, of course, full of creatures from Argentine folklore. So the girls in the school are brujas, or witches, and the boys are lobisones, or werewolves. But as you could tell by the title, 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘪, Manu does not fit into this binary system. So a side note, I got the idea for this book, kind of interesting. It's an actual current day law in Argentina, Ley de Padrinazgo Presidencial, which basically states that the president of Argentina becomes godparent to the seventh consecutive son or daughter in any family. Now, it's such an interesting law because you would say, why? Well, if you look back far enough, there is a superstition that says that the seventh consecutive son in a family will become a werewolf. And some versions of it say that the daughter would become a witch. And I mean, I think that's so cool and so fascinating how superstition kind of concretized into this law, this talk about the power of fiction and words and story, and the real world impact it can have, and what could be more apt, for this conversation. So that's just a tidbit. So anyways, as you can tell by the title, 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘪 is about a girl werewolf. Now, it has always bothered me that the werewolf trope got co-opted by masculinity when it's just so obviously an allegory for menstruation, right? It's tied to the lunar cycle. It happens once a month. The shift is painful. Some months our emotions feel like they double in size for those days. But if you Google the term 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘪 right now, you won't really find translations or definitions. Even if, I just tried Googling 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘪 and definition or 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘪 and translation, and I still don't get anything somewhat official. So the truth is, in Spanish, the accepted word for werewolf is 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝑁, which is the male derivative. So that's kind of saying 𝘓𝘰𝘣𝘪 doesn't officially exist, women werewolves. So I guess the question, maybe the important question to ask is, why is it important for readers to see a girl werewolf? If you ask me, it's the same reason it was important in Zodiac for readers to see a young girl rise up the ranks to the universal political stage. Representation matters. It's important to have characters like Manu because we already know what it looks like when the chosen one at a magical school is a white, straight, cisgender boy. But we haven't seen that trope from the perspective of a brown, undocumented girl who was born into the wrong supernatural form. So I'm a big fan of world building. I kind of established that in the beginning, that it could be tied to my identity. It could also just be that I just, as a nerdy Virgo, I dig designing systems, whole scale systems. You could say that I like to be in control, but I wouldn't take it there. I just think it's fun and creative. So I call it my 3-pronged approach. I don't know why, but basically I do know why, it's silly, but I look at setting, I look at character, and I look at plot. Specifically, though, I do it in that order. So I don't really quite know why. I sometimes credit this line from Alan Watts that says, we're not born into this planet, we're born from it. And I feel like that distinction is so key, right? Like, we really are products of this planet, of our existence. We don't just like exist in a vacuum. We would not look this way. We do not function this way. That's why I always begin with the world and with setting, because I think like take a character in our own world. They would be very different if they were born in China versus Argentina, versus anywhere else. And so I think you have to take into consideration context. And so I like to begin with that. So I begin with setting. And then once I've got kind of like I understand the world that the book takes place in, even if it's in our world, I need to understand, even if it's in like a tiny town here in the States, I need to understand the politics of this town, and the what brought this character there, however many generations back, and what kind of like, it's all in the genetic code of the character. Um so so kind of to beginning with setting, I will tell you, kind of on a broader note, like even though I am starting with setting, it's kind of a trick, because the truth is, in a book, everything is character. So I start with setting because I want to understand this character. I need to understand their context. I like to give an example of this. It's like a silly little exercise, but I think it kind of I haven't come up yet with anything that better elucidates the point I'm trying to make. So one mistake I think a lot of beginning authors make, writers make in with setting, is you think you need to include a lot of details to create setting, and that's not true at all. In fact, like, most readers will start to skim if you start to describe everything about a location. What makes setting work, what makes it powerful, is how well you filter it through the character's point of view. Because if setting is not revealing character, it's doing nothing for you. Think about Great Expectations. One of the settings we most often cite is Miss Havisham's garden, this overgrown garden, this dead garden, this decaying garden, this, thing that has been untended and abandoned and just left to kind of grow weeds wildly. Why? Because we're describing Miss Havisham as much as we're describing the garden. It's so important. So back to my exercise. My exercise is simple. It is this. I want you to picture an empty room, just a blank, white walled, normal room. And I want you to think about the characters in the story you're working on, and each one of them entering that room. They should all see something completely different. Your more optimistic, hopeful character might see a blank canvas upon which to design their new life, or their new space, or their new home, or their business, or their idea. Whereas a forlorn, like sad, depressive character is going to see an abandoned space. They're going to notice the cobwebs in the corner, or the dust gathering, and see like this place has been forgotten. It's pointless. It's useless. See what I'm saying? So it's like the place didn't change. You don't have to describe it in a million words. It's just an empty room. What matters is what it evokes in the character. And we need to see that. We need to get that through the writing. So, I would say that a book's, in my experience at least, like a book setting often does go hand in hand with the plot, or like with the storyline. In Zodiac, Zodiac is an easy example, because I'm talking about like the 12 or 13 Zodiac signs. So, very right offhand, there's going to be that many worlds. And I began by breaking everything down in a guidebook. I'm telling you, a lot of details. I had to come up with the topography, whether it had to be terraform, what materials used to build structures, what kind of, like I said before, the architecture, the technology, everything that they would build for themselves. Actually, once a reporter asked me, she was like, how come you sci-fi fantasy authors are always like dividing us into factions and houses and districts? And I like laughed, because I'm like, why do you think? Because that's the world we reflect, the world we live in. And what do you think countries are? Nations, if not factions or houses or districts? That's what it is, and that's why we're here. I think we're sociologists, or aspiring sociologists, imaginative sociologists. We use our imagination to arrive at things as opposed to actual real world data, but sometimes it can bring you to really deep truths. So when kickstarting the process of creating a new universe, I think it's also just like I was saying with setting, like, don't just let details lie and fill the page with text, like, filter it. Well, I would say the same thing with your world. Don't simply create rules because they sound cool or difficult, or, oh, this sounds like a neat world, or this. Really think deeply about the world you're creating. I think it's so important to world build with a world view. Think about, again, always reference our world. Things are complicated, ask the hard questions, like, how do I mean, easy to hard, you can start with, like, how do they refer to themselves, beings of this world? How do they function? How do they speak with each other? How do they communicate? What is the power structure? Who has it best? Who has it worst? Why? What unites the citizens of this world? What historical moments charted the course of this world? What are the gravest injustices this world has ever served? What defines success in this world? Would I want to live in this world? Would I thrive in it? And why? These are important questions to ask, and they make you think about our own world and the power structures within it. And the more complex you make your universe, the more texture you put into it, the more alive the characters and the plot line will become. However, let's not get carried away, because there are some people who will write these, like, epic books that kind of tell you everything, and it's you have to remember that not every question is relevant to every character, so to not get lost, you want to keep as your North Star your concept. Like, what is the lesson here? What are you trying to get through? What is the universal problem that your character is trying to solve? All right, so let's move on from setting, I think. So once I know the soil of my world, I understand, like, the elements, the forces at work, I can begin to plant the seeds of my characters and watch them grow. I think as humans, our ancestral memory is sort of inextricably tied with our sense of self, right? We are who we are because of how we were raised, or what we were exposed to. So that's why I need to know the context of my character. Even the stuff that the character is missing is important, right? Like the negative space, everything tells me something, everything informs this character's psyche, and I need to know this. So much of this information will not make it into the book. Like, I have so many pages of stuff that's just like, it's not for the actual story, it's for me, because the more alive the characters and worlds are for you, the more that will translate to the page and to the reader. So anytime, I laughed at myself once because I spent from 6 a.m. to noon, not joking, fantasizing that I was in the Zodiac universe, and a whole day with Ro about, like, but how does she pay her tickets, and where does she grocery shop? I remember it being noon and realizing I had done nothing all day. And I felt like this desperation, like, I'm on deadline, I have to be writing, like, what am I doing? Until I remembered this is part of the job too. Because from that brainstorm, so many ideas came to me of things that I hadn't thought about before, or details I could fill in. And detail is your best friend in a fantasy, big world like this, because it's almost so much, it could be overwhelming. So you want to anchor the reader with the details that are relatable, like, get as, up in there as you can with, like, little, it's like, just make the person feel like they can smell the coffee, like, in the mug and stuff like that. Details are so clutch. So okay, what defines your character? Obviously, I could talk about character forever. Character is the hardest part, but it's also everything in a story. If you have great characters, you can be forgiven a lot. But if you have even like an awesome plot and a cool setting, if people can't stand your characters, they're probably not going to get very far in the story. What defines our characters? We're all multifaceted, but not all facets are equal. There's walls within us that can break without shattering us, but other walls are load bearing, right? So we need to know basically, I mean, we need to know a lot, but there's three kind of important questions I like to ask from the outside about a character. What does your character want? Number two, what is your character's wound? And number three, what is your character's backstory? So backstory is kind of easy. Like it's more or less what I was telling you before. Like you really want to grow this character organically from the ground up so you understand, their most embarrassing moment, their greatest betrayal, like what they wanted in life, what was, just stuff, their biggest heartbreak, just some of the stuff it's important to know for references. What does your main character want? This is huge. If your reader cannot identify very early on in the story what your character wants, what their goal is, they're going to have a very hard time identifying at all with that. We need something to root for. It's like when you're watching a race. If you don't know that there's a finish line, you kind of lose the tension. You need to understand that finish line so that you can really root for the character and get excited. So it's very important for the reader to root for your hero, that they know what exactly they're rooting for and that it be a worthy cause. So what is the wound? This is like an interesting one because I mean, I think we all have many wounds, we're complicated, but when it comes to writing a character, you want to try to focus on one to not make it too messy and to kind of guide your plot. So the wound can be defined many ways, but like one way to think about it is like it's a core decision your character has made about themselves or their world a long time ago before the start of the book. And basically they're going to disprove it in this story. So one idea would be maybe your character had a rough childhood, or their parents like didn't have a lot of time for them or show a lot of empathy for them or whatnot, and they kind of decided that they're unlovable. So they don't believe they deserve love or are worthy of love. So that's going to decide how they approach the relationships in the story and how they move about their world. If they've had a really rough, like horribly unfair luck, and they've had like the worst, child or whatever, they might believe that the world is rigged against them and everybody wants them to fail. And, this is like that nobody's worth their trust, and so you need to know what choice or what belief, whatever this character has before the start of the story that kind of guides what they do and their decision making. We all have it, we all do it, and a lot of times like our main issue and maybe our partnership can be traced back to that. So it's very important to find for your characters because again, you want them to feel real, you want to give them texture. So what else can I tell you about this? Oh, a character should have an agenda. But it's okay for them to also have inconsistencies, I mean, like we're not all perfect all the time. And like we are, I am large, I contain multitudes, it's like, so allow them some grace, like to kind of to mess up, especially if you're right. I cannot emphasize this enough, especially if you're writing YA. It is so important for teens to see that they're allowed to mess up. And if your character isn't messing up, really question whether they're teens or human. So the other thing to remember is that characters exist in a matrix of relationships. So a lot of times they will be shaped by the people closest to them. And that's very important because if your character is just stoically whatever their traits are and moving forward just in that way, it's not going to feel super realistic. We're bumped up against and everything and shaped and by those nearest us, and that's true of us and it's true of characters. So, okay, let's move on to plot. So I like to think of plot in the simplest term. It's forcing a character to make a choice. Not just any choice will do, of course. All action is not equal. The choices that I'm talking about are the ones that force your character to almost like reveal something about your character, force them to see something, and moves their story forward. They should challenge their basic nature and shift the direction of the narrative a bit. So that's how you have a plot point, or a turning point, because at that point, the story's direction should take a new turn, a new shift, and that's because of the knowledge that was gained from this turning point. So a cool way I like to set up to think about the book and kind of like to reduce it to just one sentence is, when stakes, a character must action, otherwise consequences. So that's like if you're pitching your book, it's like a very, when this happens, like, let's use Hunger Games, which is the example I'm probably going to use for this. When Katniss's little sister's name is pulled out of the reaping ceremony, Katniss must volunteer for the Hunger Games, otherwise her sister will die. So a big thing about this is also, and I'll get into this more, is that the reason I call it like forcing your character to make a choice is you want to remember that turning points have to originate from your character. So it can't simply be there was an earthquake and the character lost their home and that's my turning point. It has to be an action your character takes as a result of that earthquake. That is your true turning point. So I'm going to explain that more now, because this is my, oh my God, I have everything's three prongs, but my three prongs plot approach. So the way I think about it is, you have your load bearing walls, right? And I think for a story, any kind of story, it's a novel, a short story, any kind of thing to stand, you need to have three very load bearing, columns or whatever you want to call it to hold it up. Inciting incident, midpoint reversal, and black moment. Your inciting incident can be like 15% of the way in, maybe something like that. It's pretty early on. Midpoint, and then your black moment is like 75% of the way through. Now, with the black moment, some people sometimes refer to it as, think it's like the climax of the book, but I don't think of it that way. It's the last big thing that happens before the last act of the book. So it's kind of the moment where your main character realizes they have nothing left, so they have to give it their all. So I want to use Hunger Games because it's such a great way to explain this. So inciting incident is the thing that takes your character out of their ordinary world, right? Like, and if an object in motion will stay in motion, well, this is the catalyst that acts on it and boom, gets it out of its normal orbit. In the case of the Hunger Games, that would not be the reaping ceremony. It wouldn't even be Prim's name being called. It's the moment that Katniss says, I volunteer. Because again, it has to be an action your character takes. When she volunteers, changes the course of her entire life. The midpoint reversal is the point of no return. At the midpoint reversal, no matter how much your character wants to go back and rewind the clock, it's physically impossible. So of course, the midpoint reversal is when she enters the arena, because that's it. She cannot go back. She didn't try to run. She could have tried to escape. She didn't. She chose to enter the arena. The black moment. Some people sometimes call it the moment of the berries, but that's the climax. The black moment leads to the climax. And the black moment in this case, and for any black moment, you have to go back to your character, their nature, and what they want. What was the goal? Because otherwise, for all of us, our black moment would be death, and it would be too easy, and every story would be identical. But what was the inciting incident? what led Katniss to all this? Because she had a choice. Her name wasn't called. It was protecting her sister. Katniss is a protector by nature. We meet her hunting food for her family. So, what is her black moment? She fails. She fails Rue. And when she fails Rue, it's failing Prim. And it's the preview of the ultimate black moment of the series, of course, but that is your black moment. And that is the moment where she loses everything and kind of realizes that's it. I've got to give it my all. So those are the three, I would say, most important plot points that you need to know before you start writing something. Um, so, well, I'm going to stop a little here because like I'm getting into a whole crafting and start taking questions. But yeah, let me know what you're thinking or what you would like to know about.
All right, great. Thank you so much for that overview. That was wonderful to learn a little bit about your writing process and get some advice there. Our audience is a bit shy, but we still have some time for questions if people are thinking of them and just waiting for this time. So one of my question is, you mentioned back at the beginning that you focus on writing for teens. Would you ever write for children or adults?
Yes, I would love to.
Mhm.
I've thought about that a lot. I definitely think I will write adult one day. In fact, my new book, and see a moment to pitch it, is Castle of the Cursed, which I
Mhm.
just turned in. And I would say that's probably the closest like it's like bordering the line of YA adult. So
Mhm.
I'm definitely like getting closer and closer. But I do like the idea too of going younger. And maybe doing some middle grade, or even, what I hear a lot of parents talking about is they have like they have children who are kind of reading in that in between middle grade and YA-ish area. And because so much YA skews older, like late 16, 17, they
Mhm.
don't have something for those 16 and 15-year-olds. So that's something that intrigues me as well, like filling in that hole.
Yeah, that's really interesting because yeah, there's those little gaps between those age groups. And
Yeah,
it's hard to find the
it's
right books.
true. Yes, it's true.
All right. So another question I have was you mentioned some of the works that you had a number of years ago that didn't end up getting published. Would you ever revisit some of those, or have you?
Great question. Thank you. That is something I should have brought up. But yes, so important. All your rejected stuff is still material. It's like a mine of gold. It just, you might not use it the same way as you originally thought. But yes, in fact, so Castle of the Curse, I took a prologue of my fifth rejected novel. It had this prologue that everyone who had read it always loved the prologue, and it stuck with them, and it stuck with them, and they would be like, so what was the thing, or like what happened. And so I kind of always knew I was going to use that prologue, but the rest of the book didn't work. So like I kind of found a new story around this little like 4-page prologue. And then with Novisona, it's actually a descendant of one of my rejected novels, which was Yellow Eyes. So as you can tell, it's not very different.
Mhm.
And it was like 2008, I want to say, that I went out with it, and it was very different as far as like the concept, the story around it, but it was still Argentine immigrant girl, still based on the same Argentine laws. She discovers she's a werewolf, like a lot of similar elements, and totally rejected, could not find any support for it. And then I remember one agent telling me, um, teens in the US don't care about Argentine immigrants, and it
Mhm.
was so dismissive of me, of my identity, of readers, of others like me, of the story. It was brutal. And so it took me until like 2017 to finally try again. So it unfortunately did shut me down for a bit. And of course, like I was saying, it's like a sea of rejection. It's really hard to feel your worth, or to know like that you should fight for something versus not. So I wish I had fought harder. I do think the story should have come out sooner. But I am glad that eventually I was able to bring it to light. So yeah, no, totally still mine all of it.
Mhm. Yeah, they can find new life in another book. I think just
Recycle.
yes, always recycle, recycle, reuse. So my last question to you is just when you finally did get that acceptance, you finally got your first book accepted to be published. How did you feel? How did you celebrate? How did it all go down?
It was amazing. It was the best feeling in the world. I will never in my life forget, like, just finding out, like, that's it. I'm gonna, like, 𝘓𝘰𝘀𝘪𝘻𝘰𝘯𝘢, is gonna be a book and it's gonna be published. And it's funny because I had this arbitrary deadline in my brain that I needed to be published before 30. It became like
Mhm.
this weird, like, chant, that I was like, I have no idea why, since this is a career that doesn't expire. It's not like a dancer, it's like you don't have to rush it. And in fact, I would argue the longer you wait, the more you have to say.
Mhm.
But I just had this weird fixation, and 𝘓𝘰𝘀𝘪𝘻𝘰𝘯𝘢 came out at 30. And so it's so funny because it's just like it was just to spite me, like,
It just made it there. That's pretty funny.
like,
Yeah. I think a
oh
lot of
well.
people put those deadlines in their head. Even like you said, they're arbitrary, but we make them up ourselves and we try to achieve those goals. But you still got published, so that's what
I
matters.
I know, and I do advise people all the time, teens, when I talk to them, especially ambitious teens who are already writing and
Mm.
already, like, take your time, trust me, because you're gonna burn through this time, and then you don't get it back. You don't get to
No.
be a teen again. And it's just like you should just enjoy it. This will happen. If you just don't stop, it will happen. I firmly believe that.
Mhm.
I could have told myself, if 5 rejected books, how could I possibly be a good writer? Like, who gets 5 rejected books and still thinks that they can do this? Guess what? When you walk into a bookstore or a library, you're rejecting thousands of books. Is it because they're
Mhm.
not good? No, it's because you're one human being and you, like, can only. Well, that's the same with finding an agent or an editor. Like, it's not science, it's not math. It's so subjective, and it's so hard to fall in love, and, like, to find. So it's like you have to just believe in yourself and believe you just didn't find that one person yet, but that's
Mhm.
fine. Like, it takes time. It's normal. I wish someone had said this to me at that time, but so that's why I say now.
That's great advice. Yeah, that's really helpful. Just, yeah, keep working, keep looking, and trying to find your person, even if
Yes.
you're, yeah,
There's
find
yeah,
people who
there's no
believe in you
rule
and the people you
saying.
work. Mhm.
Yeah, and you might be ahead of your time. Like, look, obviously 𝘓𝘰𝘀𝘪𝘻𝘰𝘯𢢢 was ahead of its time, or Yellow Eyes was ahead of its time, but there was a moment for 𝘓𝘰𝘀𝘀𝘀. You never know. And I always say this, like, art is art, like, it's sort of like it can go right over somebody's head, or it can pierce them through the heart, but it can't be
Mhm.
wrong. Art is not wrong. It's your truth. So, you got to just keep fighting.
Right, so that actually brings us to our continue the experience. So of course it's going to be Romina's books, 𝘓𝘰𝘀𝘪𝘻𝘰𝘯𝘢 and 𝘓𝑰𝑗𝑎𝑑ORA. Both are available on Libby, so that way you can go ahead and download it right from 𝘓𝑰𝑗𝑎𝑑𝑜𝑟𝑔/ebooks. You don't even have to leave the house, you just need your library card. And we do have the physical copies as well, so you can always go down to your local branch, see if we have it there, or put it on hold.
Yay!
Got to put that in, make sure people know that we have them. And if anybody has any questions for the library, you can contact us on our website, 𝘓𝑰𝑗𝑎𝑑𝑜rg/contact, or you can give us a call at 813-273-3652. And if you have questions for Romina, you can go and check out her website, RominaGarber.com. It also has all of her social media links on there, so you can go and reach out to her. For all of our upcoming programs, you can go to 𝘓𝑐plc.org/events. I want to thank everyone for joining us today in the audience, and a special thanks for Romina for coming back, do another program with us. We hope to have you again in the future.
Thank you so much. And yes.
Wonderful. We'll definitely be reaching out. Okay. Good night, everybody.